afternoon, everyone, and good morning for those of you in Europe. My name is Karine Lespayandel. I'm the Executive Director of the French Chamber of Commerce in Singapore, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you today at this webinar on digitalization in the Singapore Maritime Industry. I'm also very honored to introduce our 5 distinguished guest speakers today. His Excellency Marc Abensour, Ambassador of France to Singapore, Mr. Frédéric Moncani de Saint-Aignan, President of the Cluster Maritime Français, French Maritime Cluster, based in Paris, Mr. YC Choi, the Regional Vice President of the Economic Board of Singapore, also based in Europe, Dr. Sanjay Kutan, Executive Director at the Singapore Maritime Institute, and Mr. Julien Glory, CEO of Ascens. So today the program will be as followed. There will be some introduction remarks that will be followed by 3 presentations. And then we'll have a Q&A sessions with questions from the audience. So please use the Q&A button for your questions. And also please note that this webinar will be recorded. Now, Mr. Ambassador, the mic is yours for your introduction remarks. And I believe a new maritime agreement just signed this morning. Mr. Ambassador.
Thank you very much. Mr. Choi, Regional Vice President, EDB, Monsieur Moncani de Saint-Aignan, President of the French Maritime Cluster, Dr. Kutan, Executive Director, Singapore Maritime Institute, dear panelists, ladies and gentlemen. So as you may know, and it is very unfortunate, Minister Djebari, the French Minister for Transport, had to postpone his visit to Singapore. It's due to the COVID situation in France. And as you know, we are facing challenging times. And so we have to adjust in real time, to a constant evolving situation. But please let me, on his behalf, say a few words for the opening of this webinar on maritime industry, which is co-organized by EDB and the French Chamber of Commerce. The COVID crisis has been testing the resilience of the maritime industry and making transformation of maritime sector even more pressing. And by this transformation, relates in priority mostly to digitalization and decarbonization. And this was addressed at the opening of Singapore Maritime Week this morning with by Minister Ong Ye Kung, who insisted on these new borders for the maritime sector. And just before the opening of the Maritime Week, I had also the pleasure to sign a MOU on a cooperation between France and Singapore in the maritime sector with Mrs. Kwa Lei Hoon, the Chief Executive of Singapore Maritime Port Authority. This MOU will allow France and Singapore to develop even more synergies to promote innovation and encourage development of solutions to precisely, fulfill these objectives of digitalization and decarbonization. In parallel, as you may know, we launched the French Maritime Council in Singapore, which was initiated by the French Embassy, and which is a platform to better coordinate all the different French stakeholders and to foster collective actions and articulate it with the public operators. And the aim of this MOU is to increase the visibility of the French know-how by relying on the assets of the numerous French companies which are based here in Singapore and who have developed business activities, not only in Singapore, but also across the ASEAN and the whole region. And for this, we can, of course, rely on our partners from the French Maritime Cluster, but also the French Maritime Industry Group, GICAN, and the French Chamber of Commerce. So the agreement, the MOU, which was signed this morning, will build on very strong convergence between France and Singapore in the field of digital innovation and green shipping. And it will rely mainly on innovation and training efforts, which are at the core of the French maritime strategy. And our ambition is to double the added value and jobs of the French maritime economy. It will rely also on energy transition with renewable marine energy. We think that we can make significant contribution to low carbon electricity production in our energy mix, because as you know, I mean, France and Singapore have extensive maritime areas and also maritime activities. The members of the French Maritime Cluster are at the forefront of the digital revolution to reduce gas emission, thanks to new technologies such as IoT, smart grids, digital twins, and we think that contributes, I mean, to make ports even more sustainable. And the agreement will also, last but not least, rely on traffic management and maritime surveillance, which covers not only monitoring of vessels, but also exchange of information on maritime traffic. And this is key to increase maritime domain awareness and greater resilience for our global supply chain. So we think that on all these issues, France and Singapore can play the role of driving forces and prepare actually for the maritime industry and the ports of the future. So I want to express our deep gratitude to all those who contributed to this agreement. Not only the French Maritime Cluster, which is specifically mentioned in the agreement, but also, as I said, I mean, the Maritime Industry Group, GICAN, and the French Chamber of Commerce. And with the Maritime Council in Singapore, all the stakeholders will be in charge to implement this MOU and to bring France-Singapore partnership in the maritime sector at an even higher level, and which is key because it's a strategic area in the current context. So thank you, and I wish all the participants a very good webinar. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador, and congratulations. Now, I'd like to turn to President. If you could tell us more about the Maritime Cluster and the digital transition.
Yes, good morning or good afternoon to all. First of all, I want to. Could you hear me? Right? It's fine. Okay. I just want to thank the French Chamber of Commerce in Singapore for having invited me to deliver a speech today, with, of course, a special thought to its Executive Director, Karine Lespayandel, and a special thought too to Marie-Noëlle Tinet, which is my Deputy Director, and which has worked a lot to achieve what we're doing today. I would have, of course, preferred to be in Singapore today, but I think everybody knows the reason why we are not there. And I can assure you that at the time things are going to have been better. It will be a very great pleasure to come in Singapore and to continue on the road that we have opened years ago, and we are today marking a milestone on this pathway for future. I've got to be very brief. My speech will be articulated on 3 points. First, if you allow me, a very short description of the French Maritime Cluster. Then a word on our partnership here in Singapore and France. And then I will focus on the digitalization and the environmental transitions, which in my view are completely linked and connected. The French Maritime Cluster is an organization which gathered today more than 430 companies, all linked with the blue economy, with the maritime economy. And we are acting to promote the French blue economy in a, of course, sustainable way, just to get the blue growth as we are all waiting for. Of course, we have different objectives and different way to work, but we are working a lot on the partnership with the international organizations, and also regarding all what is linked with the digitalization and environmental transition. That's the reason why we are here today. The French Chamber of Commerce in Singapore has created a partnership with the French Maritime Cluster in 2014, and there was launched the French Maritime Committee here in Singapore. This has made possible in the aim of helping French companies settled in Singapore to work in synergy and to foster cooperation with the Singapore authorities and companies. In that respect, I really want to say a special thanks to all the managers for their involvement in this committee, and a very particular thanks also to Stéphane Courquin, Chief Executive Officer of CMA CGM APAC, who is leading with the leading force here of this committee today. Last summer, French ambassador, and His Excellency, I had my special thanks for that. Last summer, French ambassador in Singapore and his team, led by Florent Rommel, has triggered in partnership with the French Chamber of Commerce in Singapore, with the Cluster Maritime Français, and with the GICAN, the launching of a Maritime Council, and it has been expressed a minute ago. It's this initiative that drives us today to the MOU signed this morning between Maritime and Port Authority and la Direction des Affaires Maritimes, the French Maritime Directorate. I'm very proud to be online today for this special moment, and I thank Mr. Kwa Lê Hun, Chief Executive of Maritime and Port Authority of Singapore, for his confidence and his deep involvement to permit and further develop this MOU between Singaporean and French economical actors. With this MOU, it's the entire French Maritime Task Force composed by, namely, Direction des Affaires Maritimes, Banque Publique d'Investissement, Cluster Maritime Français, GICAN, and private-like companies like Bureau Veritas, CNES, CLS, Opsilog, GTT, with Ascens, Julien, Naval Group, Cine, Technip FMC, Total, Fuel Labs, academics, or universities. All they want to promote and develop synergies and concrete projects between innovative French and Singaporean maritime ecosystems, in particular by strengthening industrial and international partnerships. In the particular field of digitalization, and it will be my third point, and environmental transition, CMF is acting at the forefront, it has been said, and as I know that Maritime and Port Authority is also on this first line. As a reminder, the Cluster Maritime Français launched the Eco-Energy Transition Coalition, what we call T2EM, in partnership with ADEME, which is the Agency for the Environment in France, and the Ministry of the Seas, and also 13 companies. It's a coalition, especially we can name CMA CGM, Bureau Veritas, Total, ENGIE, EDF, Naval Group, with also professional organizations, GICAN and others, and also with 5 research centers. This coalition is mainly targeted to the eco-energy transition based on new energy models, the future energy mix, energy efficiency, and biodiversity. We must have a global approach, not only the ships, but also the ports, with the energy supply chain, with the whole of value chain, including services for finance and insurance. Our objective is to synchronize and mutualize efforts to transform the maritime activities, especially for shipping, especially the shipping. France must contribute with other countries to international initiatives. We are now working at the creation of a lab, T2EM lab, for accelerating synergies and studies and innovations and projects. New method for the lab, it's a first digital platform yet developed, and that's the digitalization point. Information to consolidate the innovation ecosystem, decision-making to help stakeholders, technical solution, finance, collaboration, and co-innovation to accelerate projects. We want to create and animate an innovation ecosystem. A lot of solutions exist, but we must innovate because the future energy models need ruptures. We must work with a cross-industries approach, sharing solutions. Some of solutions are in rail, in road, in infras, could be interesting for ships. For that, we create the digital mapping of solution, and we will be happy to contribute also to the Agence pour l'innovation dans les transports launched by our Minister of Transport, Jean-Baptiste Djebel. What are the ways for cooperation with Singapore? Through our lab, testing solutions, defining objectives, also technologies with their business models, deep sea with Singapore, Europe, but also short sea and Asian area, and also model of great multimodal hubs. Consolidating, of course, relations between our both innovation ecosystems, referencing, and contributing to the international version of our digital platform. CMF, Cluster Maritime Français, and CMS-CGM work in clear coherence. We define a vision and consolidate the ecosystem, and we will accelerate together the application of solutions in industrial projects. I won't be long. I've been too long, I think, right now. Just I want to apologize because I will be obliged to leave you at 11:45 French time. Sorry. Another important meeting starts at that time. So sorry for that. And if you have questions, my Deputy Director, Maino Entine, will be more than happy to answer to the questions. Thank you for having invited me to this meeting. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'd like now to from the Economic Development Board, who will tell us about Singapore as a global maritime hub and the future plans also for Singapore connectivity and digitalization. And I think, YC, you can also share some slides. Thank you.
Thank you, Karine. Just making sure that everyone can hear me. All good? Okay, I'm just gonna share my slides. 1 minute. Can everyone see? Super. You know, after 1 year of doing this, this is still a moment of truth, whether the sound and the slides come on. But no, thank you, Ambassador and the French Chambers, and of course, good morning and afternoon, wherever you're dialing in from. Like mentioned, my name is Choi, and I'm from the Singapore Economic Development Board, or EDB for short. A quick introduction about us. We're a statutory board under the Ministry of Trade and Industry, and together with our sister agencies like A-Star, Enterprise Singapore, JTC, and of course, other stat boards like MPA, we take an integrated approach to economic development. Elaborating a bit on what we do, 2 aspects. I think the first is what we call investment, facilitation, and promotion. So we support companies landing in and expanding from Singapore to access the Asian markets. The second thing of what we do is less visible, but I will argue more strategic. So we do industry development. So we look across different verticals where Singapore can be competitive in, and we take an active approach together with our sister agencies to build up that industry and the surrounding ecosystem. Across the decades, I believe we've built up strong industry verticals, such as in manufacturing sectors, marine and offshore, very relevant here. But we're also looking to grow the horizontals that cuts across different industry verticals. And I think very relevant to today, it's about supply chain and connectivity, in which of course, maritime is a huge aspect. And of course, the digitalization of the economy and also the nation. But before I jump into it, maybe a bit of trivia to start us off this morning, both here in Europe and of course afternoon in Singapore. When we think about Singapore as a global maritime hub, we tend to think about big tankers, container ships carrying goods like oil and gas, consumer goods. But I want to share that I think it all started with ceramics, specifically the trade of ceramics between China and Europe and Middle East through Southeast Asia. So if you go to the Asian Civilization Museum in Singapore, you will see the ceramics through the centuries tell the story. So on the left picture, as early as the 800s, so the 9th century, ceramic wares were traded between the Tang dynasty in China and the Abbasid Empire in the Middle East. So 57,000 pieces of such wares were found in the Tang shipwreck not far from Singapore, obviously mass produced in China, shipped to the Middle East. And you can already see the combination of designs, the green splash Chinese designs combined with the blue cobalt characters that was only found in Iran at that time. Obviously, this carried on to the 1500s, what I like to call porcelain contract manufacture. So the Chinese obviously dominated the craft until the 1700s. So prior to that, large amounts were still ordered and shipped to Europe via Southeast Asia. And the aristocratic families, the European families that had very varied tastes, they ordered both exotic Chinese designs as well as had their coat of arms imprinted on them, which you can probably see in the photos above. But of course, the exchange of goods also means the exchange of culture and ideas. In the 1700s, you start to see very sophisticated designs, and they will look very familiar to you because on the left, you see one, which is where the porcelain is manufactured in China. But of course, the gilded bronze mounts were from France, from Paris during the reign of Louis XV. On the right, of course, the porcelain from China, the lacquer bowls from Japan, and again, the gilded bronze fittings from France, catering to the Baroque Rococo style popular in that period. So really, I think this is just to illustrate the point that, Southeast Asia has always been the maritime route between the East and West for centuries, where goods, ideas, and cultures flow, and with Singapore as its hub. And we hope to persist that even as we enter the digital age. Today, of course, Singapore is still a leading logistic and transshipment hub in Asia. Of course, beyond ceramics, it supports the oil and gas, life sciences, consumer goods industries, amongst many others, and anchored by key global players, many of which would be familiar to you. I think the connectivity to Asia Pacific and beyond is super important. And of course, there's air connectivity, but today we're focused on the sea connectivity. So our ports have 60 berths, handling a capacity of 40 million TEUs. And I think interesting to note, in just the past, in 2020, a COVID year, we still handled 36.9 million TEUs, with about 200 shipping lines connecting to 600 ports in 123 countries, and estimated there are about 1,000 vessels in the port at any one time. I think important to know that this is a very resilient industry. Even through COVID last year, the volumes and activity were very similar to 2019, and we only expect it to either maintain or even to grow as the economy recovers. Obviously, this has both spawned and supported by both our sea transport industries and marine and offshore industries led by MPA and EDB respectively. They're home to 5,000 and 1,000 companies respectively, making us the top maritime capital and the second busiest port after Shanghai, which is, I believe, quite an achievement. I think the baseline, obviously, for us is to maintain that efficiency that we're known for in our ports. So 90% of the physical cargo and electronic permit applications are cleared within 10 minutes. But really, future plans is to go beyond just efficiency, but to effectiveness. So we'll look to relocate our city terminus to an integrated port at Tuas, increasing its capacity from 40 to 65 million TEUs. I think at this juncture, of course, we have to mention our key port operator, so PSA, which again, many of you will be familiar with. So they run flagship operations in both Singapore and Antwerp, and is connected and participates in major port projects across the world, about 50 coastal, rail, and inland terminals across 18 countries. But I think they're a good example to illustrate some of the trends that are happening globally in the maritime industry. So, PS is going beyond just being a port operator to an end-to-end supply chain orchestrator. So 4 trends I think that we pick up. So number 1, taking on advanced transshipment management beyond just being a port operator. The second very interesting one is having multimodal connectivity. So the Chongqing Connectivity Initiative is one to note, basically creating a land-sea corridor, trade corridor to Chongqing, sailing by sea to Qingzhou, and then the rail to Chongqing, basically bypassing the port at Shanghai and the Three Gorges route, shortening the overall journey by 2 weeks, and of course, reducing the cost. But I think beyond, again, like I said, beyond the efficiency is really the effectiveness as well, because this route aims to open up trade, import, export, and business along that trade corridor and support the growth of the Western Chinese provinces. The third trend, I think, has been already mentioned earlier, environmental sustainability with the use of digital and, of course, future fuel solutions to bring that alive. I think speaking of multimodal, it's also talking about the connectivity across the physical and the non-physical domains, such as connecting physical goods, data, and finance across the entire supply chain. And obviously, this would involve not just PSA or port operators, but stakeholders across the whole supply chain. For example, using blockchain technology to connect both the physical and non-physical domains. Speaking about digitalization, I think I can also give a broad overview about how we think about it in Singapore. So like I said, it's a horizontal for us that cuts across various industries, including the maritime and marine and offshore. Our approach is really to attract the top tech companies and the talent and the capabilities that they bring about, build that strong tech ecosystem with the right ingredients, not just the tech companies, but the startups, the capital, the corporates dealing with open innovation, the research institute, the incubators, the ingredients that make a thriving tech ecosystem, and also to encourage partnerships across these various stakeholders. Talent is also an important point for us to have that strong bench of STEM talent. So $19 billion was invested in public research to have that pipeline of talent and ideas. And last but not least, I think we always almost forget that the digital world is built on top of a physical infrastructure. So when it works, no one thinks about it, but that's really very important to us. So having that data center and cable, subsea cable capacity, routing through Singapore is also something that we keep a close eye on. The various programs in the digital world, but I thought I should just highlight a few. So we've rolled out various national programs, and AISG or AI Singapore is one of them. It's a 5-year, 150 million national program for upstream research to AI technologies, midstream innovation through grand challenges, and of course, downstream commercialization with industry. And out of this, I'll just highlight the AISG 100 experiments or AISG 100E. So the program is meant to solve industries' AI problem statements and help them build their own AI teams. So you can imagine, given a problem statement by a company, AISG will provide the funding, lead researchers, engineers, or even apprentices to work on them. And the company has to match the funding in kind and in cash. So you can think of it almost like a 50-50 partnership to solve the AI problems, but also to create the pipeline of new AI talent, both for the company, the industry, and of course, for the country. Another initiative, I think specific to the maritime sector, is TCOMS. It's a national R&D center for our maritime and M&O sectors. A JV, a joint venture between our sister agency, A-STAR, which is an umbrella of public research institutes, and of course, the National University of Singapore, NUS. It takes a three-pronged approach. So first is to build state-of-the-art capabilities. So they have the deep water ocean basin facility equipped with advanced wave and current generation systems to simulate challenging ocean environments that marine platforms and ships can operate in a physical deep water ocean basin. The second, in the digital domain, is having the petascale capabilities of our National Supercomputing Center. That's to do the modeling and simulation that you need to recreate complex operating scenarios. The second approach is to draw from the deep domain knowledge that comes from A-STAR, other research institutes, and of course the universities. And of course, last but not least, to have strategic industry collaboration. So MOUs have been signed with notable LLEs and MNCs like Rolls-Royce and DNV. I'll just highlight one of the research programs that they are working on, which is called SEOPS. It's a focal point of research to develop autonomous and remotely operated vessels and the environment that they can safely operate in. So this brings, obviously, to create this, it really brings together many digital capabilities that has to be built in this sector. So for instance, the sensing and prediction of waves, vessel interactions, the vessel structural health and performance, And to do this via the architecture of digital twins and having a shore control center. So it's a focal point to bring some of these digital capabilities together to bring about the application of it in the maritime sector. Just to touch on other digital and R&D initiatives, in Singapore, we have what we call SME Go Digital Program. And then again, across different industry, we recognize that the SME sector is so important and we have to help our SMEs digitalize too. And especially in the maritime industry, many suppliers to the industry are SMEs and cannot be neglected. So these are having, this program is to have pre-approved solutions, what we call consultancy services, and of course, financial support through grants and bonuses to provide these SMEs with a low cost, easy to implement solutions with a centralized support held back at agency. And these are in the three main SME sectors that you see there. Of course, longer term, we also have the maritime R&D roadmap, which should bring us to 2030. And of course, this I will let the expert on our panel, Dr. Sanjay, to elaborate a little bit more later. So I hope that was a good sort of overview to start us off. So thank you, and hopefully you enjoy the rest of the presentation.
Thank you very much, YC. It was a great overview indeed. And I think also there's a lot of information already on the chat that has been shared about the resources available. Now I'd like to invite Dr. Sanjay Kutan, Director of Singapore Maritime Institute, to present us briefly the Singapore Maritime R&D Roadmap 2030 and its ambitions in terms of maritime transformation. Sanjay.
Yeah, thank you, Corinne, and good afternoon, Your Excellency Abunso, Ambassador to Singapore, fellow panelists, and I can see almost 90 participants. Welcome all, and hope you're all staying safe. Let me just, I trust you can see my slides. Thank you. Yeah, so the roadmap is, let me just get down to, oops. Right. So the roadmap is a second version. We had the first version in 2013. And I think it demonstrates the relentless pursuit of excellence here in the maritime sector in Singapore, that we're constantly reviewing where we want to go in light of the technologies that are quickly evolving across the space. And I think if you go back to 2013, you would imagine the technological landscape being quite different if you look at it now. So we work very closely with MPA, and we divided our approach into 5 strategic thrusts. There was the efficient next generation port that we were looking at, and YC had given you a flavor of the aspirations around that. And with that aspiration comes the need to close the gap between aspiration and reality. And this is where innovation steps in. And we set up a center of excellence of next generation port, which actually looks and uses a lot of digital technologies around that. The other area was the strategic sea space and maritime traffic management. And as all of you know, Singapore is actually very small, and seawater, port water is only 100 square kilometers, and we have 1,000 ships a day with a ship moving in and out every 2 minutes. So strategic sea space management becomes a very important area that we need to focus on if we are going to cater to a 64 million TEU scenario in the future, right? And we can't depend on Excel spreadsheet anymore, and we really need to really digitalize that whole space. The third area is really looking at autonomous vessels and smart vessels. And in that perspective, we set up the Center of Excellence of remotely and automated surface ships called SEOPS, which YC mentioned as well. And they really look at cyber physical modeling to understand the autonomous ship behavior in a meta-ocean, digital meta-ocean, so that you can predict the movements to ensure that it's safely navigating through the seas. And it doesn't matter whether it's short sea or internet or open sea, there is a difference in the meta-ocean data. And of course, cutting across these trusts is the maritime safety and security, which is very important. And that we set up a Center of Excellence of Maritime Safety at the Singapore Polytechnic. And they really focus on making sure the seafarers are trained and we understand the stress levels of seafarers. And we have just this year commissioned the Advanced Navigational System, which enhances that whole training space. And finally, on maritime environment and sustainable development, which also cut across all these trusts, we have also set up a Center of Excellence there at NTU, the Nanyang Technological University, and they are responsible to really look at where and how we navigate going forward, especially with decarbonization. Now, the roadmap is driven by 3 national initiatives. One was the Sea Transport Industry Transformation Map. As you know, in Singapore, almost all sectors had industry transformation maps developed, and is actually available to the public to reflect how every agency or sector, public sector, was going to actually guide the nation forward. The second thing we had was IMC 2030, which was a group of both public and private sector chieftains in the maritime sector who came together and thought about what does 2030 look like and how should we get there. And of course, there was another grouping called Next Generation Port 2030, where we have public and private sector come together to visualize what the future port situation. So these were important drivers. There are 4 external drivers. One was the social, economic, and geopolitical changes, the technological advancement we've seen, and I just mentioned from 2013 to now. There were greater safety and security threats, and environmental sustainability was becoming a key theme, and it should be, and that demanded a new way of operating. Singapore has also had resource constraints. Our population growth is, I think, 1.01 or 1.1, and there's a greater offering on the table for the best minds in Singapore. So the economy is diversified quite a bit, that the maritime sector now may not be the first choice, and we're working hard to enhance the excitement around the future of maritime, and digitalization actually could be the answer, knowing how many people like to play computer games these days. So now when we look at the industry capabilities, we ask ourselves, what would impact the needle? Well, what would shift the needle in our transformational efforts? Because there's a lot of capabilities you can develop out there, but what are the top 8? Digitalization, planning and optimization, autonomous operations, maritime safety, port security, maritime cybersecurity, maritime energy efficiency, and marine environment management. So we see these as key focus areas to build capabilities if we are really going to transform in the way that we should transform for a better future. Right, so our efforts are always have these 8 areas in mind when we look at prioritizing projects, thinking through how we move forward with the universities and students. Now, there are enabling technologies across the 5 trusts, right? And they can be grouped in this digital intelligence, connectivity, efficiency, sustainability. It's just so many jargons out there. But what we did was we tried to at least list them, and so that we can keep our eye on these areas of enabling technologies. Because when you look at a research proposal, there'll be many elements that we are actually trying to develop. So we try to see whether these elements are actually part of the research projects that can enhance those enabling technologies in the space. I'm not going to read through the whole list, but you get the idea that there is a focus and a deliberate attempt to look at the important areas that is going to shift the needle. Now, the other thing is when we do R&D, it must deliver impact, and you will see that digitalization is a key enabler of impact. So we're either going to eliminate wastage and or consequences of our actions. We need to mitigate consequences and enhance performance. So these are the three big buckets when we think about impact that R&D can actually enable. Now, right in the center, where if you understand these kind of charts, is where they all come together, and you're looking at timely analysis and response. And this is where your sensor technologies all must be tuned in with the right connectivity. So because you demand an impact in terms of response, there's no point giving the data and it happens much later. So I'm not going to go through all the areas, but it gives you an idea when we start thinking about impact, that we really start thinking about the areas that we really want to push and drive those impact. And you can see there are manpower impacts, and environmental, there's a timeliness element to the whole thing, and there's also obviously a cost, right? Now, digitalization in itself, initiatives. So there's a lot of initiatives in the maritime sector, right? They're putting the right assets in, the sensors technology, and you know the sensors, they vary in terms of the ability to be able to collect in terms of the volume, the variety, the velocity, and the veracity of this data. All this must come together, but in itself cannot drive impact, right? It needs a collaborative innovation. So what I mean is this information is enabling the ability to then use to develop innovative algorithm and analytics, because ultimately what we want from data is intelligent insights, decision making, and action. So it's insufficient just to focus on assets, sensors, and data. We need to couple that with algorithm and analytics so that we can drive all the way through from data to decision making. And that in middle part, unfortunately, it requires a lot of innovation. And I think this is where R&D plays a strong role in. And we hope to carry on this direction. Well, that's it. The roadmap is available publicly online, so you can go to our website or write to us, and we're quite happy to send you the link to the R&D roadmap. Thank you very much, Corinne. Back to you.
Thank you very much, Sanjay. Very interesting presentation. Now I'd like to invite Julien Glory, CEO of Essence, who will present an interesting case study using IoT on board vessels. Julien?
Yes, hello, can you hear me? Okay. Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Good morning to Europe, friends. My name is Julien Glory. I'm the CEO of Essence since 2019. So I joined Essence just before the COVID crisis, unfortunately. But I'm very pleased to be here in Singapore. It's a very nice place. And I would like to thank first the French Chamber of Commerce of Singapore for organizing this nice seminar. Very interesting, and thanks for all the presenters for their very good presentation so far. So I'm going to talk about, for the next 10 minutes, about IoT on board vessels. We already used this word quite a lot during the previous presentations. IoT means simply Internet of Things. And if we want to do digitalization, it starts with that. This expression may suggest, because we are using IoT everywhere now, from our smartphone, our smartwatches, smart homes as well. And we have the feeling that even a coffee machine, if we plug it to internet, we are going to have a smart coffee machine. Unfortunately, doing IoT on board vessel is not that simple, because the ship itself is not that simple, and the connectivity as well is not that simple. So when we develop in Essence and in the GTT group some applications for IoT, we always start with the user and all the pain points the user may observe, may see. And when you are ship managers, you have many challenges every day. And we have many pain points. So our process when we develop a new IoT system and a new features linked to this IoT, what we can call digitalization, it's always user focused. And so when we develop our system, we discuss with the users. This is the most important phase for the development of a new system. So we try to identify which are the pain points for the users. And then we look at the vessel itself. Because the vessel, on board the vessel, there is a lot of sensors already. And we have to define if we can highlight and help the final user with the existing sensors. Sometimes, I would say most of the time, we have to add new sensors such as torque meters, vibration sensors, flow meters as well. So we have to complete the system in order to give the correct insight for the users. For example, just as an example, on an LNG carrier, when we install our IoT system, we collect data from more than 500 sensors. So that's pretty huge number of sensors to collect. Then, as you already mentioned previously, we have a bunch of algorithms. So the purpose of the algorithm is to convert the sensors into KPIs that the user can use and can take decision based on that. And obviously, we have a user interface. And this user interface can be a web application, can be a mobile application, can be email alerts or something like that. And we should not forget that the IoT of vessels is different from the IoT, the everyday IoT, industrial IoT. Why? Because here onshore, we have fiber, we have 3G, 4G. Soon we are going to have 5G. And it's easy, we have a very strong connectivity. But when you are in the middle of the ocean, of course, you don't have access to all these networks. So most of the time, when we install one of our systems on board a vessel, especially on small vessels, we have to add dedicated connectivity, like satellites, most of the time. So these are the basic bricks which make the IoT useful for the user. And we can see that the purpose of IoT is to make a link, to create a bridge between onshore and offshore. And if you allow me a small digression, the very first time I've been on an LNG carrier, I know very well LNG carriers. The very first time I've been on an LNG carrier, it was about 15 years ago. And one of the seamen told me Singapore is a bus stop. And indeed, it is a bus stop for LNG, for all kinds of vessels. I would like to remind some numbers which already been mentioned. So there is a ship coming in or coming out from Singapore every 2 minutes, which is equivalent to Gare Montparnasse in Paris, for example. We heard also recently about the Suez Canal, which has been blocked for a few weeks and has blocked the global maritime traffic, about 10% of the global maritime traffic. Here in Singapore, there is 30% of the goods transit to Singapore Strait. So this is huge. Of course, we already mentioned as well that PSA is for the transshipment of container, one of the is the best one in the world. And we have also Changi Airport, which transports the equivalent of French population every year. Unfortunately, not in 2020 for the reason we know. By the way, it remains a very, very good port for crew change. We have also major ship repair yards, including one which is building a bunker ship of LNG here in Singapore with the GTT technology. And we have more than 200 bunker barges here in Singapore. So when you want to do IoT, I'm pretty convinced that we we should have a foot in each world, and Singapore, I would say, is one of the best places in the world for that. If we want to focus on one project, I would like to use the case of the bunker barges, because there are many bunker barges here in Singapore. I would like to show you one example. So when a ship needs fuel, for example, up to several thousand tons of fuel, so a bunker barge comes, they connect the pipes, and on the pipes there is a mass flow meter. This mass flow meter is mandatory since 2017 here in Singapore. And it gives better accuracy, but better transparency also for the receiving vessel. And just another digression, if I may, the technology of this flow meter is based on a phenomena discovered by a French scientist called Auguste Coriolis in the 1800s. Okay, so for this operation, the crew of the bunker barge and the receiving vessel need to fill up minimum of 7 documents manually. Today, everything is on paper. And the project we have with MPA in Singapore is to convert this documentation into a tablet, an application on the tablet. And the advantage of that is we can also retrieve the data from the mass flow meters directly. So it means in one document, you have all the information related to this operation, which is very interesting. And because it's digital, we can transfer it and store it onto servers and transfer that to the ship owner and to the barge operator as well. But because Singapore is the most proactive port in the world in this field, there is also another project, and we are very proud to participate, is the CDI project. CDI means Common Data Infrastructure. So basically, it's a data lake where all this data is transferred to and relevant parties can access to, including MPA, for example. And I would like to announce that we are very proud that this week we are going to start installation of this system, the EBDN system, onto 2 barges here in Singapore. So this was one of the examples, and the key word for this example is transparency. But we have many examples we can share with you if we have more time, but unfortunately we have only 10 minutes. But I can talk during hours about other examples. And we are able to help and to support all the pain points the users may have. So I would like to thank you, and thanks again the French Commercial Chamber of Singapore for arranging this webinar. It was very interesting. Ascenz is not an alone company. We are a part of the GTT group, so we are working very closely with other IoT and digital company like Marorka or OC Engineering, and we would be very happy to answer your question if you have some.
Thank you very much, Julien. I think, yes, we have a couple of questions that I'd like to ask from our audience. The first one is, well, for EDB, but also, Sanjay, for you, is about the challenges and obstacles in the implementation of digital technologies in Singapore, the maritime sector, and what is the approach to tackle these challenges? Maybe both Sanjay and YC, you can answer. I don't know. Who wants to start?
No, I can start very quickly. I think the challenge with digitalization is, well, broadly, I think it's about the translation of the basic research capabilities into something that is actually applicable for industry. And then how do you commercialize that, right? I mean, I think this is not just for maritime, but also cuts across different industries. And I think I'm just going to combine this with another question that came in during my presentation, which is, what are the open innovation initiatives? So that's something that actually we are very proactive in trying to create in Singapore. So there are many open innovation platforms available. But the one which I will point you to is what we call the Open Innovation Network, or OIN. We can just provide the link easily later. So it's basically a virtual platform where we aggregate both public agency and corporate problem and challenge statements, and then put them online and invite applications and solutions, right? So it's a typical one where, startups or companies can, apply through the portal, send in your pitch deck, and then if you're selected, you have a chance to pitch, and of course, eventually build a POC, and fingers crossed to commercialize them in time. This platform does it across all industries, but of course, focusing on the maritime and logistics sector today, I just want to highlight two that we did last year. So last year, there was this Smart Ports Challenge, which was organized by MPA, and there were 17 problem statements from MPA, as well as corporates like Alpha Uri, Ocean Network Express, and Jurong Port. And some of these problem statements, just to give a flavor, are like, using AI for manpower and equipment optimization at the ports. How do you have a 3D walkthrough visualization for cargo ship inspection instead of just using, 2D PDFs? And of course, also beyond the digital domain into decarbonization, such as cleaner fuels and energy efficiency. Another challenge was a trade and connectivity challenge. One of the corporates were the Container Depot and Logistics Association, and one of the challenge statements was, how do you do automated inspection of shipping containers at the port? So that's just a snapshot and a quick flavor. I'll just go online, and I think this year there'll be more maritime and connectivity focused one. And then just bringing it back to your sort of question, Karin, I think these open innovation platforms are really important to connect the right solution and capability to a larger player with the problem and challenge statement, and eventually, hopefully, to commercialize it and to leverage the scale that these larger corporates have.
Thank you very much. Sanjay, would you like to add?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just add on to what YC has said, but I'll focus on more on the challenges. We had a workshop with a number of maritime industry players. I think this was in 2019 on digitalization. And one of the key challenges was a disconnect within the organization. Digitalization was seen as an IT department issue rather than a business development or business improvement issue. So, and the skill sets are quite different, you can imagine. And one of the key pushbacks from the IT department, as much as they wanted to do something about it, was the cost benefit analysis was never so clear, that people couldn't prove that by investing X dollars, I will get Y returns. And I think one of the discussion points that came up was we need more case studies of cost benefit analysis. So I hope the work that Essence is doing, not only just showing the solution, but what are the cost savings or the efficiency gains that can allow the CFO of the company to decide, yes, therefore we shall spend X dollars on digitalization, because it is not an IT department thing, it's actually a corporate thing.
Thank you. I'll just ask maybe another question. Improving digitalization solution may increase the risk of cyber attacks. Is Singapore at all concerned by this, and are steps being taken to prevent this?
Okay, yes, cybersecurity is a big thing. We even have a cybersecurity agency in Singapore that's looking at everything and anything. Yes, it is. And strangely enough, despite the number of attacks in the maritime sector, a lot of ship owners are still not sure whether they want to put in cybersecurity provisions. They are depending either to go manual when things go wrong, and I think we are at the inflection point where people realize that the reliability of their operations is going to be dependent on a robust cybersecurity architecture. And we are actually running a study at the moment by iTrust, which is our cybersecurity center of excellence at the national level, to look at maritime requirements for cybersecurity. And we ran 2 webinars already. I think the final report should be coming out before the end of the year. And we hope to provide guidance to the maritime companies in Singapore in what they should be doing and thinking about. And then we can start seeing where the R&D gaps is. Yes, so it is very important and we take it seriously.
Sure it is. Maybe just one last question before we finish is about the impact, of course, of the pandemic on the maritime digital industry. I don't know if anybody wants to say, maybe Julien?
Yes, may I? Of course, the pandemic, there is a before and there is an after. I would say before the pandemic, and this join what you are going to say, Dr. Sanjay, is it was nice to have before. Now with the fact that people cannot go on board because of the travel restrictions, and I know all superintendents and chief manager used to go on board to see what's happened really on board the vessel. They cannot do that anymore, and they understand that having a remote access of the vessel become a must-have, because they can have direct information of the vessel. So I think in the next months and the next year, because we see more and more projects of big majors in this direction, it will be very exciting, because I think the click that we need happens. Now, more and more, they would like to have direct data from the vessel. So these next months and next years will be very exciting for IoT and digitalization in this field. I truly think that. Of course, I don't have crystal ball and nobody have, but I deeply think that we are going in the good direction for that.
Thank you. And YC and Sanjay, maybe a word of conclusion before we leave our audience.
Yeah, just we're running a lot of public webinars on the various research that's happening. So go to our LinkedIn, follow us on LinkedIn, and then you will get announcements. In fact, we're having port digitalization webinar next week with the University of Turku from Finland. So yeah, just follow us and you can keep the track of all the stuff that's happening also in the cybersecurity space. Thank you.
No, just a quick word. I think adding on to what Julien mentioned, I think it's cliche, right, that COVID has accelerated many trends, but I think this is very true for the maritime sector. It's shown us the difficulty with managing labor-intensive industries, the movement and congregation of people and employees. And then you add into the mix the need for environmental sustainability. So I think it's a perfect storm that's coming together, where more digitalization is both required and will be demanded from the players and of course the ports in Singapore. So very exciting space, and looking forward to all the good work that everyone will do.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much to all our distinguished speakers today. In the interest of time, we have to finish now. But thank you, Mr. Ambassador, distinguished guest speakers, for this very interesting webinar with a lot of insights and takeaways here. So just to let you know that the French Chamber has planned a lot of upcoming events. So please do not hesitate to browse our website. And well, have a very nice day, a nice evening, everyone, and stay safe. Thank you so much.